All right, Ryan Mayer, Director of the Office of Catholic Identity Assessment and Formation for the Archdiocese of San Francisco. Welcome to Reasonably Rational. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you.
It's been as the kids say these days, it's been a minute since Ryan and I convened any kind of meeting of these two mediocre minds to talk about anything. I think the last time we had an extensive conversation was in the run up to our pilgrimage to Italy. You'll talk more about this when you introduce yourself, but Becky and I and the kids were going on sort of like a singing well, no, that makes it sound like we're the Von Trapp family. Our daughter was going on a singing pilgrimage with her choral group, and we were all tagging along to Rome. And so knowing that you had lived in Italy, we pinged you for some, hey, if you're a cheap Catholic family with lots of kids and you need to survive 10 days in Italy, what are some life hacks? And you were kind enough to offer us a wealth of information.
Good. Well, you survived the trip, so you're welcome. I hope we helped in that way. But
We owe that almost entirely to you, Ryan.
yeah,
Yes.
and you're downplaying the extent to which you are the Von Trapp family of the Phoenix metro area. I think you can
Well,
claim that.
yeah, it's that. Yeah, it's one of those things you try to calibrate, like how much on the radar, under the radar you want to be when you have a special gift like being the Phoenix Von Trapps. Yeah. So some of us are musical, others of us maybe not so much. Becky would be the first one to. And by the way, so I should also point out, dear viewer, Ryan is not only a friend of the program joining us here, but he's a friend of the family. My wife Becky is a huge Ryan Mayer fan. This stems, first of all, Ryan and I work together. We'll get to that too, but this stems largely from an online incident where I had written an article of some kind. I was actually trying to remember exactly what the context for this was, and I'm old, so my memory is just not very good anymore. I had written some kind of article, had posted it, and on Facebook there was some engagement, which is always great. And then there was a person who was engaging in a fairly hostile manner. I was mostly blissfully unaware of this because I wasn't really on Facebook much, but Becky was in there fighting. She was scrapping and totally repping the product, and that's my husband. And, so she said, the way she describes it, she's like, I just remember that like I was getting in it with this person on Facebook, which of course is always a great idea to begin with, but like no one else was coming to my defense or your defense. And then all of a sudden the clouds part, light shines down, angels begin to sing, and here comes Ryan Mayer.
Thunderstruck started playing.
So Ryan, introduce yourself to people. Who are you? Where are you from? What's your story? How does it get you to where you are today?
Well, my wife Melissa likes to say that when I tell stories, I take people on side quests, and sometimes there are tangents within the side quest. So she has to she'll kick me under the table, tell the short version of that, please. So this is a dangerous question to begin with, but I grew up in for the most part in Arizona, convert to the Catholic faith and to Catholic education. Went to a huge public high school, Highland High School in Gilbert, Arizona. Had a very good experience, despite it being just an obscenely large public high school. Had an overall good experience. My senior year of high school, the short version of this is I started coming to Mass and to St. Anne's Catholic Church in Gilbert with a friend of mine who was in a confirmation program. I basically started coming to be a troll. But I was so committed to the troll life that I bought a catechism and a Bible and started reading them. And here we are now. Ended up teaching in theology in Catholic schools for 20 years after that. So you really have to be careful about trolling, the Holy Spirit. But
So, Ryan, were you invited as like moral support by this friend? Like, Ryan, I have to go through confirmation. I can't do this alone. Come join. Or was it like, you're going to confirmation, I want to come and just sit in and see what that's all about?
no, I mean, he was my good friend. I'm sure it was like, hey, come with me. I want someone to talk to, kind of thing. And I probably asked, well, who else is there? What girls do we know are going to be there, kind of thing. And uh, and um, and then I ended up becoming a seminarian for the Diocese of Phoenix at the same time that you did, which is, I think, where we met each other. Actually, I think you and I met for the first time in Rome at World Youth Day because we were
Yeah,
both chaperoning a group to World Youth Day in Rome in 2000.
that's
And it was
right.
right before we each went to our respective seminaries for the diocese. So I spent 4 years as a seminarian at Mount Angel Seminary in Oregon, had a great experience. Um, Graduated and decided to take some time, fully anticipated coming back at some point. Ended up teaching at Notre Dame Prep in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'll tell you, I owe a lot of my career to you, Steve Green, because I remember interviewing with the principal there, and at one point and I don't know why I didn't know that you worked there at the time. Like I would have made a special appeal, but the secretary came in and said, the department chair will meet with Mr. Mayor now. And I look over your shoulder and you're, looking over her shoulder, giving me the thumbs up. And I was like, oh, I got this. Okay.
You're,
So
that was your second thought, though. Your first thought was, how on earth did he become the department
they
chair?
put him in charge.
Yeah,
Uh,
wow.
yeah.
I
So,
withdraw
so
my
we,
application.
we had a great time. I only taught there for a year. We had a great time teaching together. And again, very long story short, have to be really careful about this because it's a great story to make a great movie, but it is a long story, long winding story. Met a girl from Northern California. I actually met her right before I left seminary, but that's not why I left. A lot of people ask that. And uh, ended up marrying her and moving to Northern California, and I live now in Sacramento. We have 4 kids. 3 of them are at a Catholic grade school here in Sacramento. One of them just started high school at Chesterton Academy of Sacramento, which I helped start. I was a founding board member there. Had a great moment the other night. We were watching the San Francisco Giants beat up, I think, on the Diamondbacks, maybe. Um, and
Entirely
I look
possible.
I look over and he's reading the Iliad, watching baseball. I was like, this is the best. This is
That's
excellent.
that's a huge win.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but for the last few years, I have been the director, a one-person office, the director of the Office of Catholic Identity for the Archdiocese of San Francisco. 90% of what I do is alongside and with the Department of Catholic Schools there, although we occasionally get pulled into to other projects and work with other departments. So I've been in that role for 4 years. Before that, I spent almost 15 years at Marin Catholic High School, which is one of the 4 archdiocesan high schools of the Archdiocese. It's right over the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. So I'm going to stop there because I think that's enough. And if I really start telling stories, you'll have a hard time getting me to stop.
I love your story so much. But so there's I want to pull on a couple of the threads in there. Yeah, so we were seminarians together. I don't know if you remember this, but when we were in Rome for World Youth Day, 2 separate groups. So I was in charge of a group that was I think we comboed. Yeah, it was St. Thomas the Apostle in Phoenix and St. Mary's in Chandler, comboed up to like rent a bus and hotel. We did a tour group thing, and then you were with like the St. Anne, and were you guys comboed up with someone else too?
That's possible. I don't honestly
Just say, yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Anyway, but when I left for Rome, I was headed to Mount Angel. That's where they were sending me, and so we had like this, like, oh sweet, we're gonna be in seminary together. And then I got back from Rome, and so I'd been dating Becky, and now my wife. I'd been dating Becky, and had then got accepted to seminary. Well, that's a whole other story. It's people are probably like, did I just hear that right? Yeah, you heard that right. It's complicated. So in my file, in my dossier was this, the fact that I was dating this young lady, and so I got back from Rome with like a week and a half or so till we had to leave for seminary, only to find out while we were in Rome, Mount Angel had been like, yeah, thanks, pass, no. So they scrambled and rerouted me to St. Meinrad, which was in a conspiracy of grace that actually worked out well. because I was able to do a master's degree in my 2 years at minor. So it actually worked to my benefit that way. But yeah, I just remember the shock because then our mutual friend, Father Craig Friedley,
Yeah.
was also heading to Mount Angel. So I
Yeah.
was super excited. I'm like, yeah, my friend Craig, and Ryan's is super cool. This is gonna be great, man. I'm loving this. And then they're like, nope, you're not going there. Which in
Yeah.
mine was great too, but yeah, there's a little bit of a heartbreak there in the early going.
Yeah, I don't know if I realized that, to be honest. I'm sure we talked about this at the time, but it's I've since forgotten it. But yeah, Father Craig Freedley became a good friend of mine there, and was kind of part of my friend group. Uh, Great guy. I miss that guy. I haven't talked to him in a while. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He and I reconnect every now and again. Actually, one of the things he does, I knew him because we were in youth ministry together at St. Thomas the Apostle. So of course, Friedley is a huge Dodgers fan.
right,
So when
right.
the Dodgers come out to Arizona to play the Diamondbacks, he always books one of those tables at the little restaurant out in the outfield bleachers, and he reconvenes kind of the dudes from the youth ministry team, and we go and have some beers and burgers and watch
Yeah.
the Dodgers and D-backs, and he cheers obnoxiously loudly for the Dodgers because he's Father Craig Friedley, and we have a great
And
time.
he's a Dodger fan, and that's how they
He
are.
is he is
So
such a
yeah,
Dodgers fan, yes.
yeah.
So, um, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask a little bit. What was kind of your discernment coming out of seminary? First of all,
Mm.
sort of the taking the break thing, and then
Mhm.
obviously Melissa plays a role in the decision not to go back. But was there something specific that you were trying to do with the break? Was it something where you felt you were already kind of called towards marriage, sort of thing? I'm always interested in the kind of like the clincher of the vocation kind of stories,
Yeah.
having had sort of the same one myself.
Well, this is dangerous because again, this is you kind of have to tell the whole story. I'll try really and keep it short, but and some of this some people may not know. If you know me and happen to watch this for some reason, but so I met Melissa a few months before I left the seminary, and
Hmm.
I had already planned on stepping away, and I wanted to teach because I had some opportunities to do some teaching ministry when I was in the seminary. I loved it, thought I was good at it, and wanted to just take some time to do that. And so I knew I was going to leave at by Easter break after graduation. So again, with a plan to come back eventually. And I remember meeting with Father Don Klein, our vocation director at the time for the diocese, and my formation director. And instead of requesting to be admitted to theology, I requested for a 1 or 2 year, reprieve in between. And I think they were going to send me to Mundelein Seminary or something. But and when I requested that, he said, "Yes, we agree. You should take that time." And I was like offended by that. I was like, "Well, what is that supposed to mean?" And they're like, and I think I said that, and they said, "Well, you just requested the time. What do you mean by it?" And I was like, "Okay, fair." But so I went to my best friend in the seminary, a guy named Andrew Barja. He's a focus missionary in Colorado now, has like 8 kids, great guy.
Nice.
He was the best man in my wedding, and I was the best man in his wedding. And he had he had known someone from earlier in his life that he kind of reconnected with our last year, like during a break, and so he knew he was going to leave to pursue this relationship. And again, they're married now; they have 8 kids. He's doing great. They're
Yeah.
wonderful. So he had discerned out specifically for this relationship. And she was living in San Francisco at the time. Her name's Rebecca, and I hope I'm not revealing anything too personal about them here. But he said, "Hey, why don't you come out, to San Francisco?" And I was like, "I don't want to go out there and be a third wheel. And I was like, finally, I was like, "Okay, I've never been to San Francisco. Sure, I'll go out." So we come out of San Francisco. Rebecca picked us up at the airport in San Francisco, and we immediately drove to Marin County, which is again over the Golden Gate Bridge. So San Francisco, the airport's south of the city, so you have to drive through the city over the bridge and north. Because she was nannying for a family that lived in Marin, and she had to pick the daughter up at school and drop her off at home. So we did that, and on the way back, we're driving back, and we're on a street called Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, and Rebecca says, "Ryan, what are you going to do next year?" And I said, "Well, I really want to teach, and I've applied to a couple schools in Arizona, one of them being Notre Dame Prep." And right then, we drove past Marin Catholic High School, and I jokingly said, "There's a Catholic high school. Maybe I could teach there." Um, And then a couple of years later, I ended up teaching there and taught there for almost 15 years. So 20 minutes later, we get to the city, and her roommate and best friend from college was Melissa. And so I met
Oh, wow.
Melissa there. But we didn't really get along at first when we first met, but it was the kind of thing where like little kids who like each other throw rocks at each other, it was sort of like that, metaphorically speaking. And so Andrew and I went back to the seminary and finished the year. Well, about a week after we got back, Melissa had written me a letter, a handwritten letter, and it was in red ink. I still have it, and it was sort of like, it's too bad you didn't make a better first impression. Our mutual best friends are going to be probably going to get married, and we could have at least had a friendship. And so I wrote her back, and we wrote each other back and forth a few times. And
Did you write her back in red ink?
probably not. No, no. I'm a very black and white kind of person. So,
That's a
uh,
bold move by her.
yeah,
Red
I still
ink
don't know whether it was intentional or not, but
was the only working pen.
yeah, maybe. But so we wrote each other back and forth a few times, and then when I went back to Arizona, I had gotten hired at Notre Dame Prep, but it was the summer, so I hadn't started yet. And I had nothing, had no money, just gotten done living on a hill with monks for 4 years. So I moved in with my parents and actually started a relationship with someone else, which was not a great relationship. And one day she was an atheist. She found the letters that Melissa had written, and
Oh,
she said, "Well, what are these?" And I said, "Oh, this is just somebody I knew, before, you know." And she said, "I want you to get rid of these." And so I put them. That sounds like a movie. I'm not joking. I put them in the one place I knew she would never look. I put them in a Bible. Put the Bible on the shelf. Sounds fake. Absolutely happened. And
that's awesome.
a few months later, our friends Andrew and Rebecca were getting married, and I broke that bad relationship off, and saw Melissa again. So Melissa was the maid of honor. I was the best man, and so we kind of reconnected and agreed to start writing each other again. And at that point, I decided to go and work as a volunteer at World Youth Day in Cologne, in Germany. This was in summer of 2005. So I was part of a work team there, left Notre Dame Prep, sadly, was part of a work team and with a friend of mine, and we ended up uh, living and working almost accidentally, living and working on a vineyard in northern Italy in the Piemonte region for about 6 months, which was as
Wow.
idyllic as it sounds. Um, they, the, we had free room and board. Basically, they paid us cash under the table for any work we just happened to do that day. Like we used it as a travel base. And Melissa and I continued to write each other back and forth, and so uh, it was pretty romantic. I mean, I'm living on a vineyard and writing letters to this girl in California, and so I came back, and the two of us decided to move. We each decided to move to Denver, where our friends Andrew and Rebecca had moved, and that's kind of where we started dating. So I worked at a Starbucks for 6 months, and we really started dating there. Then I got hired at Notre Dame, or excuse me, at Mater Dei High School in Orange County in Southern California
Okay.
for a year, and we did a back and forth long distance relationship while she was in grad school in San Francisco. Then I went to Marin Catholic and ended up there for 15 years. So that's the very short version of how I met Melissa. But funny thing, the girl that Rebecca nannied for that we had to pick up, uh, you know, so I met her. Her name's Kate. I met her and Marin Catholic and my now wife all within about a half hour of each other on the same day. And that girl, Kate, Melissa ended up nannying for her after Rebecca. And we went to Kate's wedding 2 summers ago in Napa, and I went up to her husband. Her husband's name is Marco D'Amore, um, and
Wow.
I went up to him and I said, "This is going to sound weird, but I've known your wife for 20 minutes longer than I've known my wife," and met them the same day. So it's kind of funny just how, looking back, how providence, if you're open to it, right? Um, and obviously providence is most evident in hindsight, but there is no clearer evidence of God's mercy, frankly, and God's providence than the events of my life that have led me to my vocation as a husband and father and a teacher. I mean, even things like not even realizing that, you were the department chair there, having known you and then seeing you, working with you. The principal, Dave Gonzalez, do you remember him?
Yeah, I
So
do.
he,
Of
so
course.
he, when I went to Marin Catholic, and this was 3 or 4 years after I taught at Notre Dame Prep. Um, I was looking through a yearbook, and there was a picture from like the '70s of Dave Gonzalez in like polyester pants, with like this, '70s hair. And I turned to someone, I was like, "Did he?" I mean, clearly he taught here. Is in the yearbook, right? Dave Gonzalez, who? And they're like, "Oh yeah, Disco Dave," and they started telling stories about him.
Oh my goodness.
And I didn't even realize that he had worked at Marin Catholic. He was the principal at Notre Dame Prep when we were there. So like there are all these little things that are connected. And you look back and you're like, that tapestry of God's providence is so clear and so evident in my life, and it's such a blessing. Which is why I love telling these stories. I
I
I
love
could
that.
really
Oh,
get
praise
going.
God, that's beautiful. And so the phrase that I love to just sum up what you just said is a conspiracy of grace.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah, just this conspiracy of grace, man. It's incredible. So first of all, it's a great privilege to me that I was able to be part of that journey. And yeah, it was so fun. It was so fun teaching together. I remember they had the little setup where you had your classrooms, and then in between the classrooms is like this kind of, it's like a hallway with little, there's workstations in there. So in between classes, you could meet up in like the little, what they had, there was a name for it. I forget what the name for it was.
We called it the pod.
That's where the pod. Yes, the
Yeah.
pod. And I remember hanging around in the pod with you and with Tom Marr, Joe
Joe
Fagan,
Fagan. Yeah.
Barb Stan. It just, yeah, what a great team. That was so fun. Yeah, wow, that's okay. There's so much cool stuff in that.
So that, just to bring it back to Italy, right? So I had that chance to live there, and which was amazing. And
Did that
uh,
did that Ryan, did that living on the vineyard with your buddy, did that come out of being one of the crew members for the World Youth Day in Cologne, or was that some other connection that brought you there?
no, he had been, and this is another. I have like six versions of the story, depending on how much time I have to be able to tell. So he had been one of my other very good friends at Mount Angel, and he was a year behind me. He was from Boise, and he's a physician now, I think in Alaska, has kids. But he was a year behind me, and so the summer that we were volunteers at World Youth Day, he had also just left the seminary.
Okay.
So we were on this work team together, and we were in Italy visiting his sister. She was studying in Turin, actually. And he said, I guess he had an aunt and uncle that were twins, and his uncle's best friend had been engaged to his aunt or something. Anyway, he knew this guy that um, is American and married an American woman, but her sister married an Italian guy who owned this vineyard.
Hmm.
So they brought this couple over to basically run the vineyard because they had degrees in landscape architecture or something. And great family, great guy. And so Liam said, "Well, this is my friend Liam." He said, "Well, let's just try and go up." This is another great story. Let's just try and go up and see him at the vineyard. I'll email him, tell him we're going to come in on this day. Well, then Liam and I went hiking and camping in the mountains in Slovakia for like a week, and so we didn't like have email access. And we just decided to go and hope like we could make it to this vineyard. So we're on this train in the middle of nowhere. It was like a regional train, so it wasn't a fast train. And it was like the middle of the night, middle of nowhere. There's this storm following the train, and all of a sudden Liam looks out the window and he goes, "I think this is it. I think this is the train stop." So we get off the train, and the train pulls away, storm about to bear down on us, and we go to the there's no one there, like it's empty. I think it was boarded up. In my memory, my emotional memory, as my wife likes to call it, it was boarded up. Uh, so we go to this payphone in the center of the little piazza, and we I pick it up to try and make a call up to the vineyard, and the whole thing just comes off of my hand, like the cord's hanging down, you know. And right then the power goes out at the station, and it starts raining, and we were like, oh my god, like what are we gonna do, you know? And we were ready to run across the street and like break into this barn and sleep in this barn in the countryside in Italy. And so we go to cross the street, and right then this little Fiat Panda comes tearing down the street in the rain, almost hits us, you know, comes to a screeching halt. This big tall guy gets out, and I'm like, this guy's gonna kill us. And he looks at us and he goes, Liam, Ryan? And it
Oh
was
my
it was the
God.
guy from the vineyard, and he happened to just be driving by. And so we get in the car, and we said, "How did you know we were here?" And he said, "Well, I got your email, and there are only two trains into town today, and you weren't on the first one, so I thought I'd come back." So
Wow.
so that's how that happened. And we after we worked, we helped them with the vendemmia, with the harvest, and which was amazing experience. And he pulled us aside and he said, "Hey, we have a lot of work to do here. They're in the process of renovating this place. If you want to stay here, we'll pay you, you know, cash, euro under the table, and you can stay as long as you want." And we were like, yes. So
Let me
that's
think
how,
about yes.
yes, that's how that happened. But and then my wife and kids had another opportunity to live in Italy. So a couple of years ago, I was on sabbatical for a year, and we went and I studied at a pontifical university in Rome. Um, Studied bioethics there, and my wife comes from a big Italian family, and she's near fluent in Italian. Studied in Florence, and so being there for a year, I had a student visa, but there wasn't a very easy way to get them there legally for a full year. And we were ready to just go and be like, you know, you speak Italian, I think we'll be fine, whatever. Italians assume Americans are going to come and spend money and leave. Like, you know, I've actually been caught multiple times over the 90-day Schengen uh, limit, and they just kind of like, whatever, like just wave you through. But I don't know if that would happen today. But the easiest way to get them there legally, because we only had two kids at the time, was for them to become Italian citizens. So my wife did all the paperwork and did all of that, and right before we went, they had their citizenship recognized. So my wife and kids have Italian citizenship, and while we were there, we actually filmed an episode of the show House Hunters International, which is kind of funny, and again that's a whole other story. But
I love that so much. So is there like so was that something that you found and decided to attempt before you got to Italy or once you got to Italy? Because that's pretty off the beaten path. Like, we were just on a reality show in Italy,
well,
for,
I think like a lot of people, we were under the impression that they help you find a house, you know, hunt for a house, house
yeah,
hunters.
based on the title, maybe.
um, and so like a year out, we just emailed the show like, hey, we're moving to Italy. You know, can you help us find a house? And they gave us this kind of cryptic response like, how far along in the process are you? And we were like, what do you mean we haven't started the process? That's where you come in, right? And they just wrote back, let us know when you're further along in the process. Okay, I don't know what that means. Well, in the meantime, one of Melissa's roommates that she lived with in San Francisco before we were married ended up being on the show with her husband. They had moved to
Oh,
Munich. And so she said, well, I'll just give you like the producer's number. And so we contacted the producer directly and told him our story and everything. And that's when he said, well, you have to already have a place, and then we'll consider you for the show. And then we recreate your house hunting experience. So it is scripted. You have to have a place already, and then the producers find two other places that you pretend to. Well, you do really look at them and give your reactions, but you're not moving there, you know. So
do, do you go and so you've already got your place because that's the stipulation.
Yeah.
Do you go to the two they find and be like, oh, dang it, this would be so much better than where we ended up? Or are you like, oh, thank
Yeah.
God we're in the place we're in?
No, and actually the first place we booked through like Airbnb or HomeAway or VRBO, whatever the website was. And it's within an hour of being there. We were all excited, saw pictures of it, and within an hour of being there, we looked at each other. We were like, we can't live here. But we had to live there for a month because we were in contract to film, and the owners had to give their permission and everything. So we lived there for a month, and then as soon as we filmed, we moved somewhere else, which ended up being much better. And ended up we ended up living in a building that was like the renovated stable of a 12th century castle in this little beach town. We had a private garden,
Wow.
and it was right on the water. Like you look out one window on one side of the apartment, and it was the piazza. The other side was the Mediterranean with this garden. That apparently Mussolini and Hitler had lunch in like 1936 or something. There's a picture of the
Okay.
garden from Time Magazine of them having
Sure.
lunch, and it's like, yeah, sure, this is great. My kids play here now, you know.
Well,
But
hopefully none of that rubs off. We'll
yeah,
try to put some good mojo into the garden with
yeah,
Ryan, Melissa, and kids.
yeah. Anyway, so we were there. We lived there for almost a year, and on sabbatical, and it was great. A little beach town outside of Rome called Santa Marinella. The House Hunters International. It's on Amazon Prime, season 77, episode 1. It's called Here Comes Santa Marinella. If you want to check that out, but
Oh, oh
it's
no,
all fake.
that's the best. But yeah, just the the backstory. And it's funny too that Melissa's friends, your friends, had already been on the same show, but in Germany. That's pretty great. So, all right,
Yeah, yeah.
great. Yeah, well, if we ever decide to move to another country, we'll hit you up for the producer's number so that we can go through the same pre-scripted experience after we've already secured housing. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I've got a lot more stories to tell about that, but I think I signed a
I can only
non-disclosure.
imagine. Yeah,
So yeah,
those are not for broadcast to the general public.
right.
So, uh, tell me a little bit about teaching at a Catholic high. I mean, I had the same experience. I was at Notre Dame for 3 years, so my whole path into Catholic education was uh, I got out of seminary with, and again, by way of kind of that conspiracy of grace getting rerouted to minor, and I had a master's degree. When I was in seminary, I thought if I don't end up a priest, I want to be a philosophy professor.
Mm.
That was my big plan. But I didn't really know how to go about doing that, and I was too lazy to look it up. So I figured, well, I'll just go teach. That's probably a good thing. Get some experience under your belt. So when I graduated, I pinged Father Don Klein, our mutual vocation director, and just said, um, I'd like to teach. Do you know, are there like any openings or anything in the diocese? That's kind of what I'd like to transition into. That's possible. And it just happened that Notre Dame Prep was about to open. So I was actually on the founding faculty there. And at the time when it opened, it was the theology department was two priests and me, and they were both from an order, I forget which one. Nice guys. But year two, their order reassigned them.
Mm.
So I was the last man standing, which is how I became the department head. It was certainly not due to my competence or professional experience by any
No,
stretch of the
no, I don't think
imagination.
anyone thinks that, Steve. But
That's right. In case there's anyone who did, I'll disabuse them of that notion right now. No, I was the last man standing, which was then why I was there to hire Tom and Barb and you and Joseph and everyone, which was just turned out to be such a great team. But uh, for me, I enjoyed teaching high school theology quite a bit, but I was always a little itchy while I was there to try to get to teaching college. I ended
mm,
up teaching philosophy and ethics at Mesa Community College for a number of years before I went and worked for the diocese here in Phoenix. Uh, but I mean, you made like a legit career of teaching high school. What was it that kind of drew you to it, and what about the experience was like? Yeah, this is absolutely I love it. Like this is what I want to
mm.
do.
Well, like you, I had a BA in humanities, and to quote one of my philosophy professors, you know who the last person to get any use out of his philosophy degree? You're looking at him. So the options were like, do I teach or do I teach somewhere else? But I honestly, I had some experience teaching high school as part of a ministry assignment when I was in the seminary, and I really liked it, and I thought I was okay at it, you know. And one of the things I loved about it was I saw a lot of myself in the students because like I shared, I was called myself an atheist until I was a senior in high school, which in retrospect I probably didn't know enough to really truly call myself an atheist. But so I enjoyed seeing those kinds of students in class, and I loved when kids would push back a little, and I loved that dialogue and the I came to love the energy of a school, and I came to really realize that Catholic education, and I still believe this today, is and I know I'm a little biased because I've worked in Catholic education and I still do, but I really believe it's the single greatest opportunity for evangelization that the church has in the United States today. And
Hmm.
I think people have a healthy appreciation for Catholic education, but I don't think they realize. I don't think it's been fully tapped into. I think it's such a great gift to the church, and I mean, people pay us to come and be evangelized, and some of them are Catholic, and some of them are not.
Right.
There is no other ministry that's really like that, you know, and so it's a great place to be is Catholic education. Uh, but I just came to love it. I came to love, like I said, the energy of a school. I came to came. This is going to sound funny, but like I came to really care about the kids and care about their souls and their well being. And that's not. It's going to sound cold, but that's not something I anticipated. Like going to a teaching in a school, I just thought, oh, I can't do anything else. I'm going to go teach, and it'll be fine. It's a job. I like doing it, whatever. And I came to really care about the souls of the kids and their well-being. I mean, I'm sure this happens to you. There are kids that pop into my head, 20 years later, and I just
Yeah.
kind of, I'm like, I wonder where they are. I hope they're okay, and I pray for them and everything. So that's kind of how I fell into Catholic education. I'm a convert to the faith, and I like to say, and a Catholic education. And then I think I was pretty good at it, and so there's that Venn diagram of like things you like to do, things you're reasonably good at, and things people will pay you for, and that was sort of the center point. Um, uh, and It was also a it's also a great gift because it helped me really hone my own faith and my own ability to articulate and understand the faith. When you
Hmm.
have day in and day out 100 teenagers who come in and can ask you whatever's on their mind,
Right.
you get you figure it out pretty quickly, right? And that was a great gift to my faith. So I loved it. I love teaching. I really miss the classroom. I haven't. I'm not in a classroom. I'm not in a school setting right now. I work for the Archdiocese, which is another topic we can talk about. So I really miss being in the classroom. In fact, I was talking to our superintendent the other day, and he just kind of out of the blue said, "Do you miss being in the classroom?" And I said, "Yeah, I really do." And he said, "Yeah, so do I." So
He's also a former
yeah,
teacher.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, great guy, great teacher. So um, yeah, and so that's kind of how I fell into it, and like you said, kind of made, I guess, a career out of it. I ended up getting a master's through Holy Apostles College in theology and bioethics. Um, and I ended up teaching a bioethics course that I developed at Marin Catholic for a number of years, which is timely and which was great that I had the freedom to be able to do that. I did get to a point, I will admit, I got to a point right, a few years before COVID, I guess, where I kind of was feeling a little burnt out, and started to wonder if I should do something else. I seriously considered going to nursing school,
Hmm.
and especially after studying bioethics.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to study for a master's in educational administration at Notre Dame. The opportunity kind of fell into my lap, and took advantage of it. And honestly, it changed my life reinvigorated my commitment to Catholic education,
Hmm.
changed both my professional and personal life. Um, and, uh, and so here we are, I'm still here.
Yeah. And there's something just I think it's an interesting observation on your part that Catholic education may be the best and most direct opportunity for evangelization that we have in the church in the United States. It's an interesting question then to what extent we've taken advantage of that opportunity. I think that's true. I think that assessment is true. Full disclosure, Becky and I have homeschooled our kids all the way through. Actually, the Chesterton Academy is very, very interesting to me. You alluded to that earlier. We don't
Mhm.
have one down here. I think it would be tricky to do down here for a number of different reasons. At any rate, I think it would be great if there was one. But um, part of our discernment, and this of course, in the wake of I'm a product of both Catholic schooling back home in Wisconsin, and then I was homeschooled fourth through eighth grade, so I had a little bit of a hybridized formation myself. But yeah, we took a hard look and uh, didn't get the sense, and I wouldn't presume to speak to this same question now because we made our choice and we've stuck with it. Uh, but back when we were first making that decision, we did not get the sense that there would be a full-throated, unapologetic, charitable, but orthodox and courageous
Mhm.
transmission of the faith through the Catholic schools here. And again, like I said, at the time. And so for us, for me, it was with a little bit of a sense of sadness, I think. With Becky, maybe less so because she's a convert, so she doesn't have like a life context for the whole Catholic education thing, the tradition of it, what it was and what it did at its best, sort of thing. But for me, it was kind of with a sense of sadness, where it's like, and then I don't know because I never had occasion to take the question outside of the context of our decision and our discernment in the Diocese of Phoenix. So I don't know. Maybe there's places out there where Catholic education is really hitting the target dead red center, has just got it teed up and thought through and discerned and built out in such a way that it's just doing exactly that work of evangelization. I I don't get the sense that that's necessarily the case. What was your experience of just sort of, I don't know. I mean, I guess in a way I'm sort of saying the sort of the state of Catholic
Mhm.
education. But yeah, what was sort of your impression being in the belly of the beast for all those years?
No, I think all of that is fair. And one thing that the church teaches about Catholic education is that parents are the primary educators of children, and so it makes the home is the first school, right, for for children, and it's a first school of virtue. It's a first school of the faith, and the school is really meant to be a help and a support for for families and for parents. And a lot of times we don't think about it in those terms in Catholic schools. Like, schools will have on their websites, they'll give lip service a lot of the time to this idea. They'll say, well, parents are primary educators. Okay, well, what does that look like then in a school? Do you form parents? Do you work to form the adults in your community? Do you support the decisions they make for their kids? Um, are you engaged in their evangelization? And so we have this idea that like schools invite families in through marketing, enrollment, and admissions, right? And it's really the other way around. Um, Families invite us in to participate in their role as primary educators. And I think sometimes we forget that.
Hmm.
Canon law is very clear about that. But canon law is also clear that one of the offices and functions of the church is what it calls the munus docendi, right? The office of teaching. So the church also has a responsibility to teach, because of the Great Commission that she's been given by Christ. And so you have these two parties. You might say you have parents who have the primary and natural obligation and right to form their children, and then you have the church that has this also that has this interest in teaching and educating and evangelizing, and the coming together of those two missions on the part of the family, the parents, and the church is really where Catholic education, Catholic schools meet. Um, and so it makes perfect sense for families to homeschool then, right? It also makes sense for them to invite, to the extent that they're not able to do all of that, the church in to participate in that role. So um, that said, the the face of Catholic education has changed over especially the last 75 years, I would say.
Hmm.
The advent of Catholic schools in the United States was really driven by these waves of immigration from Europe, right? And by the schools built were built up out of ethnic communities and linguistic communities a lot of the time. And they were a response to what were called at the time the so-called free schools or public schools uh, that were very anti-Catholic. And so Catholic families came together to fight for the right to educate their kids in the faith. One of the great debates was that Catholics didn't want to send their kids to public school because they didn't want them to read the King James version of the Bible. It's like
Right.
we have other concerns today
Yeah.
about public schools. It's not which version of Scripture where our kids are
Right.
exposed to.
Long
Um,
for the days when that was the controversy.
right. So one of the other challenges too is, and it's interesting because like one of my favorite classes in grad school at Notre Dame was a school law class, and you realize how much U.S. case law and even Supreme Court case decisions are based on the experience of Catholic schools in the United States and fighting for their religious freedom and all of that. So it's
Hmm.
really, really fascinating how much the experience of Catholic schools in the United States has driven U.S. case law around education, but it's a whole other topic. But another challenge is that uh, the 75 years ago, 90% of those who taught in Catholic schools and ran Catholic schools were clergy and religious, mostly women religious, right?
Right.
And it's the
Right.
exact opposite statistic today. It's like
Yeah.
5% maybe. Um, and that presents one of the challenges it presents, let's just name it, is we don't have cheap labor anymore in Catholic schools. And so you have schools that charge tens of thousands of dollars, in states where they don't have school choice or vouchers, um, just for families to be able to send their kids to school. And that's an injustice. A lot of people don't realize that the church's social teaching is pretty explicit about the matter of school choice. I know this has become a political issue, a partisan issue, but it's not for the church. It's a matter of Catholic social teaching that parents have the right to not only choose the kind of education that their kids receive, but they have the right to receive state subsidies for it. That's actually in the catechism. It's in the compendium of the social teaching of the church. It's in all the church's teaching documents on Catholic education. So this is not a partisan matter. It's not a political matter. It's a matter of Catholic social teaching. And Catholics especially should be more in the fight for school choice,
Yeah.
in my opinion. So
Yeah.
the other challenge that brings is that clergy and religious running schools, teaching in schools, they literally wore their faith on their sleeves, right? And to the extent that they wore habits or collars, um, but they were formed in the mission of the church. And the mission of Catholic schools grows out of the mission of the church. They're inseparable. The mission of, I heard someone say this, the mission doesn't have schools, right? Or excuse me, schools don't have a mission. The mission has schools. They're
Yeah.
inseparable from each
Yeah.
other. They are institutions of the church. They're not like, it's not like some parishes decided, hey, you know what, we could raise a little extra revenue if we also started a school. So the
Hmm.
school education's like a side thing that the parish does. No, it's integral to the mission of the church, right? And so the difficulty with that then is in the absence of clergy and religious to staff the school, presents hiring challenges too, right? Not everybody who comes to teach in a Catholic school, um, even if they are Catholic, is well formed. Maybe they were formed in a secular school of education. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they went to public school. Maybe they didn't. They went to a Catholic school, in the 70s and 80s, where the catechetical formation wasn't great. I don't think that's a secret anymore. Um, And so this presents a lot of challenges because at the same time that you're trying to really further the mission and teach and evangelize families and students, you also have to do that for the people you've invited in to do that work. And that presents an added layer of challenge and in some cases difficulty. Then you have the issue, and this is another layer of pastors, right? So pastors in parochial schools are the governing body of the school. A lot of them don't
Yep.
know that. They don't realize that. And as you know, when you go to seminary, you don't get a lot on how to run a Catholic school.
No.
Um, at all, in fact, right? Unless you're in a canon law class, in which case you're just sort of told, oh, by the way, if you ever are in a parish with a school, you're in charge. Like that's basically it.
Good
Um,
luck.
yeah, good luck. And so you have pastors who come in who are canonically in charge of the school, but who are on this spectrum of knowledge, of understanding, of frankly of interest in the life of the school. Some pastors see schools as a liability that they'd rather them close. Some of them are way too interested, um, and you have everything in between, right? And so this is why I like to go back to, you asked kind of about my role now in the Archdiocese. So I'm the director of the Office of Catholic Identity, and I like to say my job exists because of one line in a document called The Catholic School from 1977 from the Congregation for Catholic Education. And it's paragraph 66, and it says, often what's lacking in Catholic schools is a clear realization of the unique identity of the school and the courage to follow the consequences of that uniqueness.
Hmm.
And every
Interesting.
issue that we run into in our schools comes down to either a lack of clarity or a lack of courage, and usually both, right? And so my job is to provide clarity and I hope at times courage for those who lead and teach in our schools.
Ryan, how do you begin to inculcate genuine and authentic Catholic identity in a school where maybe that just has not been the case? And I mean that in terms of like what looking at it as a project, what do you hope to achieve? Like today, this Catholic school looks like this, thinks like this, does its business this way. When we're done, here's what I hope it looks like. Here's what I hope is good. But also just strategically, as you pointed out, in a lot of cases, you're going to pitch that idea, that vision, to people who are at least indifferent, and in some cases, probably even hostile to pieces of it. Strategically, how do you go about that? And then, well, one of the things that I guess occurred to me, and this is, I mean, again, I don't presume to speak to the state of affairs now, but one of the interesting things that kind of occurred to me, I think this sort of occurred to me even while I was teaching at Notre Dame. Certainly when Becky and I began to kind of discern how we were going to educate the kids. Uh, in a sense, Catholic schools are also a bit of a victim of their own success,
Mm-hmm.
in that the product in terms of academics it tends to be a pretty gold standard product. You know, great test scores and outcomes, and kids getting scholarships to elite universities, which means that in a sense, if you're not careful, the product again almost commodifies itself. It becomes this desirable, like, gosh, look at the test scores coming out of the Catholic high school as opposed to our local public high school. We've got the means. Let's send Junior there. Yeah, we can swallow some of the Catholic
Yeah.
stuff you got to put up with. Sort of, is that a mentality that you also sort of have to fight uphill against? That we're not here for the Catholic stuff, and we'll put up with it as long as it doesn't get too loud or too insistent or get in the way of other priorities like the academic sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just like every human heart, I think every Catholic school has its idols. And the first thing I'll say this: it all comes down to leadership. It all comes down to
Mm-hmm.
leadership.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one program, there's no one curriculum, there's no one anything that will transform a Catholic school unless you have a leader who has a clear vision. Again, it comes down to clarity and courage, right? You have someone who has a clear vision of what Catholic education is and can be and should be, and they have the courage to do what's necessary to make that happen. And obviously, they need support from their pastor, they need support from their ordinary, from their bishop, and from the people around them. But if you don't have that, there's nothing else you can do that will, and it sounds a little fatalistic, there's nothing else you can do to transform a school unless you have someone in a leadership position who's willing to move the ball forward and not accept the status quo, like you're saying. So, and then the next thing is the people you bring into your mission. I mean, personnel is policy, right? And I do think most people who work in Catholic schools are well intentioned. They're supportive of the mission. Some of them are in need of ongoing formation, like we all are. There are some, but there are very few deliberately bad actors in Catholic schools. They do exist, and I have worked with some of them who will openly say, I am here to inoculate the students against the Catholic faith. Like, there are people who have flat out told me that, who work in Catholic schools.
Wow.
So those are very few, though. I think most people are well intentioned, and most people, when you present a vision of Catholic education that's grounded in the church's teaching on Catholic education, a lot of them say, I've never heard this before. This is amazing. What can we do to make our school better? Right. So I think most people are well intentioned. But if you don't have strong leadership who can do that, who can articulate a vision, who can give people what they need to get there, and who has the courage to do that, then you'll just always be fighting to be relevant. I think this temptation of relevance is kind of what you're talking about. And it's a major temptation, especially in areas where education is very competitive, right? Schools are very competitive, like in south of San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Schools are very competitive there,
Right.
Especially the private schools. And so there's sort of a rush for everybody to compete and to appear relevant. And relevance is the opposite of how you stand out. It's the opposite of how you make yourself distinctive, right? It's like the Israelites. We want to be like every other nation. We want a king. You have God as your king. No, we want a king like them. Okay, you're just going to get lost in the mix. And that's what happens in schools, And so they do things like they think that to be successful, they have to have sports because that's what people want. And there's nothing against sports. I mean, these are a great part of school experience and an opportunity to teach virtue and build community. But that's not why Catholic education exists, right? And it's becomes a great temptation for families then who might have kids who, they're very good at sports and but the family's not quite sure about sending them to this Catholic high school, but they do it anyway because they want them to be part of the sports program. That's a great temptation for families,
Yeah.
And the school's really doing them a disservice by trying to be relevant and by selling out their identity in favor of these other goods, which may in fact be goods, but that's not your mission. Another big one is, and we ran into this when we were starting the Chesterton Academy here, we would have information nights and parents would always ask the same questions. And these are fine questions, but what sports are you going to have? That's the first one, right? And we do have some sports. And what AP classes will you have? And they were just like aghast that we were not offering AP classes. And they would say, well, these other schools offer AP classes. Say, well, we don't. We have a set curriculum that we think is better than what an AP class offers, And then it all came down to like, well, but they're not going to get into a UC school, or they're not going to get into Harvard if they don't take an AP class. And it's like, well, then it sounds like you have another decision to make, right?
Yeah.
So these are the idol of relevance is always present in the human heart, and it is always present in Catholic schools. And I said this to a group of new principals recently this past summer. I said, your job is not to grow enrollment. And there was like an audible gasp from one of
Right.
the, like, you can't say that. No, that is not your job. That is not your job. And thankfully, our Archbishop he's very invested in the schools, Archbishop Corleone, the Lionheart. He has a very clear understanding that Catholic schools need to be Catholic schools. We are not in the business of offering private schools with crucifixes on the wall. We are in the
Hmm.
business of running Catholic schools. That may not be for every family, and that may mean that our schools become small. That's fine. Your job is not to run a big school. Your job is to run a Catholic school. That
Yeah.
takes courage, and it takes giving school leaders permission to be able to do the things to run a real Catholic school, even if that means becoming less relevant in the world.
Has that been a vision that you've been able to pitch fairly successfully in your current role? And what I mean, just give us a rough description. If you could, we'll do high school since that was that was where you taught. That's where I
Mhm.
taught. What would in your view, what would an ideal Catholic high school look like? Like what would be the hallmarks? What would be the features that you would want to see? That like this is genuinely, like you said, not a really elite academic private school with crucifixes on the wall and a veneer of Catholicism, but actually one of those the mission has schools kind of Catholic high schools. What would that look like?
Yeah, this is a big question. I'm going to answer in a way that might make people think like, haven't you thought about this before? But so I mean, we have a lot of so before I had the chance to study Notre Dame, I did not realize the depth and breadth of the church's teaching on Catholic education. I knew there was a document from Vatican II on Catholic education. That was about it. And then I had the chance to really go through these documents, and it was, I mean, I felt like I had discovered, the pearl of great price or the great buried treasure. Um, I remember, and I worked in Catholic schools for a while at that point, and I remember thinking, why has no one told me about this? This is a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful vision of of places of formation of Catholic education, and I think there have been attempts in recent years, especially very recently, following COVID, where a lot of people have looked at their Catholic schools, at their public schools even, and really started to ask questions about what are we doing here? Like, what are we actually
Yeah.
doing here? Catholic schools especially have had to ask this question just because of the decline in Catholic school enrollment, which is starting to kind of level off a little bit. But Catholic schools have taken a serious hit in terms of enrollment, and it's really forced school leaders and dioceses to ask the question: what are we actually trying to do in our Catholic schools? And it may be the case, in the words of the of Pope Benedict, that our institutions might become smaller, but they will
Mm-hmm.
become better because of it, right? And that's fine. That's okay if that happens. I know that can be a scary thing and can even come with some loss and pain, but we have to be okay with that. So the first thing, well, before I say this, there are a number of things that are worth reflecting on if for people if they want to delve into this question a little more. One is there's a great little book called The Holy See's Teaching on Catholic Schools. It's a very small book. You can find the text of it for free online. It's based on a talk given by the Archbishop of Vancouver. Uh, his name is Michael Miller, Archbishop Michael Miller. He was the former head of the Congregation for Catholic Education, and he wrote this little book called The Holy See's Teaching on Catholic Schools. And it's just sort of an overview of like, here's what we're doing in Catholic education. And in that little booklet, he has what he calls the 5 essential marks of Catholic schools. In other words, these are 5 attributes or things that should make Catholic schools distinctive. They are that Catholic education is inspired by a supernatural vision. In other words, it's not it, the purpose of it is not just to prepare students for college and career. And this
Right.
is something you hear a lot in Catholic schools. We prepare them for college and career. Okay, but then what? Have you prepared them for eternity?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So our vision of what education is for can't be merely utilitarian. It can't be reductive, right? It has to have that supernatural vision. The second mark is that it's founded on a Christian anthropology. One of the documents on Catholic education says that every form of education assumes some anthropology, right? Um, and so does a Catholic education. It presumes that you're made in God's image and likeness, and that only, in the words of Vatican II, only in light of the incarnation can you understand who you are as a person. So that has to permeate everything in the educational project in a Catholic school. Our anthropology has to be different. And that you ask, what does that look like? That ends up in practice looking like our discipline policies are different. Our grading policies are different.
Mm.
Our dress code might be different. Our response to things like gender ideology in schools has to be different, because that is a radically different anthropology, right? Things like affinity groups. I'll just say this here, and people can write me emails if they want. No Catholic school should have affinity groups. Absolutely not, because human beings are not reductive. You cannot reduce a human person to any one attribute of that person. Once you
Yeah.
start to do that, you create division. You don't bring people together. You create division. That is a false anthropology, let alone, affinity groups that put people in, I'll just say, put them in categories reflective of gender ideology, right? No Catholic school should have that. That is a hill I will die on, and you can come at me for that one if you want. Get rid of your affinity groups. It's a false anthropology. Go ahead and have clubs, but no affinity groups. So that's the second mark. The third mark is that it's founded on, or it's animated by communion and community, right? The reason that we come together is different. It has Christ as its center. And so the life of the school should revolve around the liturgical life of the church. It should be centered on the Eucharist. This word community gets thrown around a lot.
Hmm.
I'm a stickler for mission statements, like on school websites, and they all say the same bland word salady nonsense. Like, I can tell you, if you pull up, some random school, I could tell you with some good accuracy probably the verbiage that's going to be in their mission statement, right? And then if you ask people, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. It's just the mission. We're required to have it because it's for accreditation or something, But they all use this word community. We are a diverse community. You've said nothing when you say that. Every group of people is a diverse community,
Yeah.
because no group of people is reductive to any one attribute, and every group of people is a community. What does that even mean? Well, it has to mean that you understand your communal life as centered on the Eucharist and as part of the communal life of the church, right? So the idea even of community and why we're together takes on a different meaning. The fourth mark is that it's imbued with a Catholic worldview throughout its curriculum. Catholic identity is not one piece. It's not, again, one thing you can point to and say, well, we have a crucifix on the wall. It's not just one extra class that kids take, right? It's not, you take all the things, you take all your APs, but then you also have to take this theology class.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not what that means. If you believe that the creator of the universe became a human being, that changes your understanding of the universe, which changes your understanding of how you observe it through the sciences, right? It changes your understanding of history. It changes your understanding of who you are. It changes your understanding of every single thing you do in the life of the school. And so that Catholic identity is animates everything in the life of the school. It's not one extra thing that we tack on. And then the last mark is that is sustained by gospel witness. And this is where the personnel piece comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't run an effective Catholic school unless you have people who are faithful, devout Catholics, whose life is animated by their participation in the sacraments and the life of the church, and who bring that to everything they do in the life of the school. That's a great challenge, again, because we do employ people, we do invite people into our mission that are not Catholic. And that's
Right.
fine. That doesn't mean that they can't be there, but it doesn't change our mission, right? And it actually requires us to give them what they need to be able to fulfill that mission. In other words, we have an obligation to form them. And so what you don't want is to bring somebody in, maybe who's not Catholic, and then expect all this Catholic stuff of them without also giving them formation and walking with them, right?
Yeah.
That invites a violation of their conscience. I believe that. And so I think we need to have better recruiting for our teachers and school leaders, but we also need to form them in what it means to be to be a teacher in a Catholic school. I'll just say one last thing about this, but there's one of my favorite writers on Catholic education is an Italian. He was an Italian teacher named Luigi Giussani, and he founded the Communion and Liberation movement in Italy, which is all over the world now.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I've
Um,
heard of it. Yeah.
yeah, and he has this one of I think his best books on education. It's called The Risk of Education, and it's a little clunky to read, but because it's a translation. But one of the things that he spends a lot of time talking about is the role of the teacher, and he says that he calls a teacher a walking hypothesis, and he says
Hmm.
the role of the teacher is to present a way by their life, by the way they live their life, and in their words and their teaching. But they propose by their life a way to students. And he says education has three components to it. It has the encounter, first of all, and that's the relationship, the teacher and the student. And then the student has to get to a point of what he calls crisis. In other words, like the witness of the teacher by their life proposes something that challenges the student, and the student has to ask themselves, can I live that way? And then the third step is decision, where the student takes on, for lack of a better word, ownership over their life, over their own formation, and ultimately over the decision to walk the way proposed by the life of the teacher, if that makes sense. This is all he's describing is evangelization, right?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah,
how
yeah, very much.
evangelization works. Uh, there is no program, and we're really bad at this in the church too. There's no single program. There's no single text. There's no single curriculum. There's no single, uh, you know, RCIA book or whatever that's going to fill the pews. What fills the pews is the courageous witness, the joyful, winsome witness of those who have really encountered the risen Christ and who live in a way that proposes that they really have met him to other people. That's what makes other Christians, right?
Yeah.
So, and we have to think that way in the life of our schools when we invite people in. So,
Yeah,
I don't know if that
that's
answered your question. I kind of went off on a
no,
couple
no,
things there,
that's
but
great. I really like those five pillars because, of course, the reality is, I mean, you're obviously describing in response to the question, what would an ideal Catholic school look like if you just wave your magic wand and voila, all the Catholic high schools and the Archdiocese of San Francisco in the United States now hit all these marks and check all these boxes. Those five pillars, of course, are also every bit as applicable to Catholic education and evangelization and faith formation in any format, in any venue, homeschooling, OCIA, catechesis, formation of catechists. That's all 100% applicable. It's really fascinating, and that is interesting to know that has been laid out in much greater detail than one might suspect in the church. Although I guess that's a surprise that should never be surprising. That's been my lifelong experience of the Catholic Church is pick any topic that would touch on Catholic faith or life in any way, and if you're willing to scratch, you're going to find there's a literature there. It's never
yeah,
just, oh yeah, that has something to do with Catholicism or it's Catholicism adjacent, but there's only like a couple paragraphs in the catechism. No, there's always, the church has always thought about these things,
yeah.
which is actually, to me, that's always one of the great things about being Catholic,
Hmm.
is there's a deep dive available on any conceivable topic.
Right.
And the one that you've been entrusted with wrangling or calibrating or figuring out, yeah, the church has been there. It's thought this through. It has some wisdom to offer. Um, what was it, Ryan? I'm curious. What was it that prompted you to use the sabbatical year to do a degree in bioethics? Was that something that was just kind of a personal passion project of yours, and the sabbatical gave you an opportunity? Was it something that grew out of your experience
Mhm.
teaching at Marin Catholic? Was it something more forward-looking? I'd like to do something in this field someday, kind of thing.
Yeah. So the four there are four archdioceses and high schools in San Francisco. There are other Catholic high schools in San Francisco, but
Hmm.
they're independent or they're religiously sponsored. And so, but we have four Archdiocese high schools, and all four of them are the teachers are under a single contract under all four. And one of the pieces of that contract says after 7 years of teaching, you're eligible to take a partially paid sabbatical. So you can take a year with, I think it's 40% pay, or 6 months or semester with 80, I think it's maybe either 60 or 80% pay, which is great. I think that's a great
Yeah,
thing.
that's nice.
And you're supposed to do something with it that's going to contribute to your, you know, the when you come back, your professional life or the life of the school or whatever. And so I had been teaching bioethics there. And so when I first started teaching, though, at Marin Catholic, and I learned about the sabbatical, we started talking right away about like, well, we should do that after 7 years. We should totally take advantage of that, and let's go live in Italy. Let's find an excuse to go to Italy. So I had been teaching bioethics, and there's a school in Rome called the Pontifical Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum, which is a pontifical university that offers licentiate degrees. So licentiate degrees, you probably know this, are in the pontifical structure. There's what's called the baccalaureate, which is sort of like a master's. There's a licentiate or a license that's sort of an in-between doctorate and master's. And that's what in the pontifical system allows you to teach. It's literally a license, right? And then you have the doctoral degree. And so I already had a master's in bioethics, and so this school offers the traditional pontifical degrees are in philosophy, theology, and canon law. Those are the three traditional degrees. But this school also offered a licentiate in and a doctorate in bioethics. So we moved to Italy, and I enrolled in classes, and that was sort of the, if I'm honest, that was sort of the excuse to get to Italy for a year. But I also took classes in something I was teaching, and yeah, so that's how that happened. But
So you had already done a master's in bioethics previously. Was that the one you mentioned with Holy Apostles?
yeah, that was in theology with a concentration in
I see.
bioethics.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then I
What
also
was it? What was it that prompted you to do that one and specifically to focus on bioethics?
so I had been at Marin Catholic for I don't know, maybe 2 years, and I wanted to pursue a master's degree in theology or philosophy. And one of the schools I looked at nearby, it's a great school. It's part of what's called the Graduate Theological Union, which is
Mm-hmm.
a conglomerate of theology schools in the Bay Area. And the only one I would recommend is the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology. It's sort of the only really sound one in the Bay Area. It's in Berkeley, and it's run by the Dominican friars there. And they have a joint master's in philosophy and theology. And so I was really interested in this program. And I met with one of the Dominicans there, and he said, well, I said, do you have weekend, evening classes? We had just had a baby, our first child. And he said, no, 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 you'll have to come here full time during the day. And I was like, can't do that.
That's not it.
And yeah, and I said, really? You don't offer any sort of like, even in the evening or weekends, summers, whatever? And he said, no, your situation is very unique. I was like, I don't think it is. I'm going to be honest with you.
Huh.
But so anyway, I ended up not going there. But it's a great school. I would recommend it to people who have the means to do that.
People who've
And
not just had a child.
they may have changed their programming at this point. But so we ended up going to something that was put on at the chancery or the cathedral for the high school teachers from the National Catholic Bioethics Center on
Oh
bioethics.
yeah.
It was part of one of our required professional development days, which is kind of funny because I'm now in charge of planning those days for the Archdiocese for our teachers. So, so I went to that, and they talked about how they had their certificate program, but you could do a master's in conjunction with, a theology degree. So I said, "Oh, great! I'll just do that." So that's what I did, and I really became interested in the field of philosophical anthropology and bioethics, and I did uh, the certification in healthcare ethics through the center, and then did the master's with that. So I would love to do more in the field of bioethics. Like occasionally, I get to write stuff for the Archdiocesan website. Like when all the vaccine stuff was, coming out, I wrote something about how the church understands vaccines, and wrote something recently on IVF when there was that case in Alabama that was in the
Oh
news.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so it does come in handy quite a bit, and it comes in handy to be able to talk about questions of anthropology and gender ideology when they come up in schools, because that's something all of our schools are dealing with.
Is that something that the Archdiocese has a set policy and position on?
Yeah.
Um, I was
Yes.
I was surprised. Yeah, but pleasantly surprised. I myself am a Wisconsin native, so I grew up in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee in the 70s, 80s, and 90s under Archbishop Rembert Weekland. For those
Mm.
who are familiar with the name, that'll say all that really needs to be said, probably. So I was actually really quite pleasantly surprised when the Archdiocese of Milwaukee's statement
Mm.
on transgender persons uh, came. It actually, the Phoenix had taken that statement as sort of a boilerplate document, a sort of a referent for their own discussion of their own policy and their own
Yeah.
position paper on it. And reading the arch, and this of course was under Archbishop Listecki. Uh, I was really impressed. I thought they did a really a very good job. It was orthodox. It was charitable.
Mhm.
I thought it had the Catholic ethos and anthropology was clearly firmly in mind in the writing of it. At the same time, um, it, you can't help but recognize uh, just the immense complexity of the issue, and of course, it's the tip of an iceberg.
Yeah.
I've been arguing for years. Uh, I've been arguing for years that a lot of people, Catholic and secular, look around and just how did we get here? Like this is
Mhm.
just even folks who I think were fellow travelers with the sexual revolution through most of what it produced. A lot of them have just hit, no, this is a bridge too far, or I didn't
Yeah.
sign on for this. What's been interesting to me, and I'm saying this because I want your comment on it. What's been interesting to me is, you hear certain voices out there who are fairly vocal proponents of the whole sexual revolution, the feminist
Mhm.
revolution, revolution of marriage and family. Big supporters of even something like, say, the Obergefell decision.
Mhm.
And then when it got to the trans thing, they're suddenly not only are they jumping off the ship, but they're also kind of shaking an angry fist, like, "Hey, who are you to hijack our revolution? Like this
Yeah.
this is never what we were about." And my response has been, "Of course it was what you were about. You just didn't
Yeah.
know it. This this
Right.
is this
Right.
is the branch and blossom of the sexual revolution. Of
Yeah.
course it was going to become an anthropological revolution." The fact that you didn't realize that when you launched it, or you wrote your famous book, or you gave your series of lectures to your students at your university, this was never your revolution to begin with anyway. This
Yeah.
is the enemy's revolution, and the undermining of our grasp on what it means to be human was always the plan.
Yeah.
So you spoke, Ryan, eloquently about an adequate anthropology. A genuine Christian anthropology is one of those pillars. Uh, and then coupled with the bioethics, that puts
Mhm.
you kind of right in the middle of this conversation. Just run with that for a little bit, because I'm interested in kind of your take on all of it.
Yeah, good. So to answer your question, yes, the Archdiocese of San Francisco, like many dioceses around the country, does have a policy set of guidelines around this, and different dioceses have handled it differently. Some have come out with um, pastoral letters or statements. Some have just issued guidelines or policies. Some have done both. Some have issued kind of more comprehensive catechesis around it. But what's interesting is, and if you look if you look sort of historically at when they came out, and you sort of read through them from different dioceses, it's clear they're all sort of cribbing from each other, and they're all just borrowing from each other. Like some of them, like Bishop Tom Daly from Spokane, who I love. I actually shared a classroom with him at Marin Catholic when he was the president there before he became a bishop.
Hmm.
He did marriage prep for Melissa and me. He's a good friend, but he adopted I think it was Milwaukee's actually, and just wrote basically put a stamp at the top that said, uh, "We got this from Milwaukee, approved." Like, and that that's kind of
Yeah.
how he
Yeah.
handled it. And some of them are longer, some of them are shorter, whatever. But we realized pretty quickly this was an issue, and so the first thing actually that Archbishop Cordileone did was issue a pastoral letter. It's rather brief. You can find it on the website. A pastoral letter called mail and called. Well, I'm confusing it now with the actual document from the dicastery called Male and Female, but it's something with that title. They're all sort of the same, right? The titles.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, but he issued it as a joint pastoral letter with Bishop Barber from Oakland, who's great. He's
Hmm.
Jesuit. He's great. Um, and it's unusual for bishops to issue joint pastoral letters with one another. But they decided to do that. And it was really significant. I mean, both of their coat of arms are on the letter, and both of their signatures are on it. And it was a really powerful kind of coming together, especially because, I mean, they can almost literally see each other's offices from across the bay. So that was huge. So that was a pastoral letter that went out, and it gave a few resources. And then a year later, Archbishop Cordileone issued a set of pastoral guidelines related to the pastoral letter for schools. And so, dealing with some of these issues as they come up, because we have a lot of schools, and sometimes it feels like playing whack-a-mole, with issues as they come up. But there is a set of guidelines in place for the Archdiocese. You said something I wanted to come back to, and I actually forgot what it was. I do this all the time. I'll start talking and lose my mind. But
I'm glad I'm not the only one, Ryan.
but concerning anthropology, this is kind of where the rubber hits the road with that, right? And um, schools propose in everything they do in anthropology a way of being human, and St. John Paul II said, when the creator is forgotten, the creature becomes incomprehensible.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happened. When we say to God, I'm sorry, you're in my seat, I'll determine my own understanding of who I am and my identity and my very being. That project becomes impossible, because you're only you because you were known and loved into being by the creator. And that identity is inseparable from being made in God's image. And once you lose that, once you forget that, the wheels completely come off. And
Yeah.
that's to your point. What did you expect, right? You pulled the rug out from under, and there's no foundation for understanding yourself anymore. And I think that explains a lot of what we see, not to zoom out too far, but I think that explains a lot of what we see in terms of, angst and anxiety. I mean,
Oh, sure.
this generation's been called the anxious generation, right? Because you've told them they don't need God. They don't need God to understand who they are. They can do it themselves, right? Which is an exhausting and an impossible project, because there is no you apart from understanding yourself in light of the incarnation, even. So, um, you asked, I think you asked at the beginning, what's wrong with the world? Well, Chesterton's response to that is, I am, first of all.
That's right.
but but uh, the answer is we've forgotten God,
Yeah.
and Chesterton says it's the problem is not just that we've lost our way. We always lose our way. The problem is we've lost our address. We don't even understand what we're made for anymore. And we've tried to fill it with all these other things, and nothing works. And so not only have we forgotten God, but we're just lost in the cosmos now, to quote Walker Percy. So
Yeah. There, there's something to me always a little bit I don't know. I don't know the way to frame it exactly. I guess a little bit surprising, and yet, but even as I'm saying, it's a little bit surprising. It's not really surprising at all. The rapidity with which this stuff has sort of circled the drain. The snowball effect, I guess, of the way I've been kind of describing this over the last several years, is to just say that the sexual revolution is at this point a runaway revolution. And it's a runaway revolution in the sense that the people, the human beings who launched it, and I mean, you have different folks would put different faces on the Mount Rushmore of the sexual revolution. Some would be a Simone de Beauvoir and, Alfred Kinsey. Well, you got a lot of options, but I don't think it's very likely, and I think you hear this in some of the outcry now that we've hit the transgender phase. I don't think it's likely that many of them had in mind something like, men walking into women's locker rooms and asserting a legal right to be there as women, etc. But nonetheless, that's where we're at, and the fact that it's happened so quickly, I think has a lot of people just sort of stunned, as though, no one saw this coming. How could we possibly have predicted this is where it would go? And I don't know that I would push back by saying we could have or should have predicted it, but there's always a part of me that I guess sort of looks at the surprise or the
Mhm.
shock, uh, and says, well, where did you think it ended up? Like,
Yeah.
what do you think was A, the end game, on the enemy's part, and B, what did you think was the fallout when you decide to just rewrite the sexual identity? Initially maybe it's through sexual practice. Well, now we're just gonna do kind of whatever we want with whomever we want, whenever we want, and however we want. But then eventually that's gonna erode and undermine uh, sexual identity and attraction as well, where now it's like, well, if it's sort of wide open, then, why not two men? Why not two women? Or
Why not
or
four?
multiples, right? Exactly. At some point, on the fringes, someone's going to ask why even necessarily with fellow human beings. Now, interestingly enough, maybe robots. Gosh, they'd
Yeah.
be just program them to be perfect companions and sexual partners as well, etc. But then, yeah, of course, then at some point, it's just gonna what is a man exactly? What is a woman? And by the way, sex has been sterilized, so the context for this activity has fundamentally changed anyway to sort of a pleasurable, consented activity between adults for whatever, I don't know. They provide their own teleology. If
Mhm.
that teleology is probably paying them too much, giving them too much credit, but um, yeah, where have I guess you've encountered that in a number of different ways. I mean, you were teaching high school, which that I have always said, teaching high school, and in a sense, I taught community college too, which is high school kids just a year or two on.
Yeah.
Um, if you want a privileged glimpse, if you want to really put your finger on the pulse of culture, teach teenagers.
Yeah.
They will give you a real clear view of where it's at and where it's likely to go. So from that perspective, but also even to step out of like the Catholic education context, teens and young people, but also looking at it from the perspective of the church. You work for an archbishop in a diocese. And these are realities that you're contending with on behalf of schools, sure, but parishes and just the faithful in general. What does that look to in terms of kind of where we're at, how we got here, and where we go?
Um, yeah. How much time do we have here to unpack this? I mean,
I'm going to
what?
need you to solve the world's problems in like the next 25 minutes, Ryan. So
So, no, I think you're right. And this is one of the things I loved about teaching, especially the age group of high schools. And the last 14 years, I taught all seniors. And
mm,
so they were right at that, next. And I loved teaching that age group for a variety of reasons.
yeah,
But it was, like you said, they are children of the philosophies of the 20th century, and they don't even know it. And so
yeah,
a lot of what you ended up doing as a teacher in a classroom with these kids who are little walking disciples of philosophies they know not what, um, is doing like philosophical archaeology with them, and when they say things, helping them unpack, here's what you're saying, here's why you're saying it, here's where it comes from. And then they're always horrified when you tell them about like the founder of this idea, and they're like, that's not what I meant. I'm like, well, is it though? Like, and this is, we would start the bioethics class talking about eugenics every time. And I would say,
Hmm.
this is going to be the through line in everything we talk about, right up to reproductive technology, right up to AI, right up to the sexual revolution, everything. It's all, and and of course they were skeptical of that, and they were horrified about, to learn about the Nazi eugenics programs and everything. And um, they, to the point where they thought like I was just making it up, like this was some sort of like,
Uh,
QAnon conspiracy. You're connecting the dots for them, and you're showing them like, you know, here are pictures from the Iowa State Fair in the 1930s that talk about like eugenics laws and exhibits for eugenics laws and racial hygiene laws, and like it just blows their mind to realize
mhm.
that they were not the first ones to think their own thoughts. Like they're actually, just because they all think their thoughts are all theirs, they're very independent, and I'm the first person to ever think these things in the world. um, and they don't realize they are little disciples of all the philosophies of the 20th century. And so it's really eye-opening when they say things. And there are times, I'm sure you had this experience, where students would say things and you're legitimately horrified, like as a teacher, by what they're suggest, and they just say it with this like banality of they're ordering something for lunch, but in the
Yeah.
back of your mind, and this is for me, what this was one of the great things about like studying philosophy, is the way that it really gives foundation to theology, right? It's a handmaiden to theology. But I always say my faith really grew stronger when I studied philosophy. um, but you find yourself doing this, is unpacking, at least in your own head, if not then out loud, for students, the philosophical assumptions that they're coming in with, that they don't even realize it, and they
Yep.
end up saying things that are postmodern, they're Jean-Paul Sartre, they're Derrida, they're Nietzsche, right off the page. I mean, it's almost like they are quoting to you from these texts, and they have never encountered them. They have no idea. They're just imbibing it from the culture.
Yep.
And so it's very eye opening. There's a great cartoon that has been used to describe this. Like you have two fish in a fishbowl, and one of them comes up to the other and says, "How's the water?" And the other one says, "What's water?" Like the students can't even, they don't even realize this is just in the air around them.
Right.
I remember once we were talking in a class about moral relativism, and we're defining it and giving examples, and we did this for like 2 days, and the student raises her hand after like the second day, and she goes, "Mr. Mayor, I don't understand. We've been talking about moral relativism. I still don't know what it is." And I said, "Well, it's the idea that there's no objective true or false, right or wrong, good or bad. It's just a matter of opinion. It's up to you. You invent your own right and wrong." And she goes, "No, no, no. I know that. I know that. I know that. I just don't know what moral relativism is." I was like, "No, that's what it is." Like she didn't even understand
Right.
that was descriptive of her own view. She
Yeah.
couldn't step outside the paradigm, right? So, uh, but that's one of the great benefits of teaching high school. Sometimes you get a glimpse into like where the culture is going, um, and it's terrifying at times, but it's also a great opportunity. So um,
There's yeah. It's funny. You could not have described more perfectly my experience teaching at Notre Dame. I only taught seniors 1 year. I agree that was definitely my favorite group, just because they're bordering on adulthood. You
yeah,
can take on some topics with a little more gravitas and depth to them with seniors than you can with freshmen. Oh, I love freshmen for their delightful freshmanness, but
yeah,
um, but teaching at the community college, oh my goodness, yeah, just it's funny. I looked at, first of all, you're aware it's mission territory, all of it's mission
Right.
territory. You know that going in. It was a revelation to me, though, how unconsciously and yet in spite of unconsciously, at what depth those young
Yeah.
people that I taught at the community college had absorbed these cultural presets. And what you just said is exactly right. What they had, and again, unwittingly, what they had is they had bumper stickers
Hmm.
from Nietzsche, from Sartre, from
Yeah.
Derrida, Foucault. They had bumper stickers from Hume. No clue where that
Right.
phrase came from, what it really means, and I mean, certainly not how it fits into the broader context of those thinkers and their worldview and their philosophies. I used to call exactly what you were just describing, meet your teachers. And
Right.
I would actually have them in the intro to philosophy class. I would have them begin by writing out a 3 sentence summary of their philosophy, include what it means to be human, how morality works, and I forget what the third one was. Anyway, knowing that what I'm going to get is I'm going to get like a little patchwork of these bumper stickers,
Yeah.
these slogans that they've picked up from. Most of them probably don't even remember where they got it from. Uh, and then I would, I'd use that exercise to just make the point. Uh, over the course of the semester, I'm going to introduce you to your teachers. I'm going to introduce you to the folks who came up with those ideas. And then the point would be, don't ever subscribe to a philosophy before you've got it on its feet and made it walk, because they
Right.
all go somewhere. And a
Right.
lot of these, if you get them walking, you're not going to like where they
Right.
go. You're
Exactly right.
that's not it's not you're not going to want to subscribe anymore. And then every, as you were pointing to, every philosophy eventually breeds an ethics. Ethics is where philosophy actually enters practical application mode. And that means eventually every philosophy becomes a matter of life or death for somebody.
Mhm.
And some of them just breed monsters. The whole eugenics thing. That's great that you started out with eugenics and had that as sort of the through line, because yeah, of course that's everywhere. It just goes by different names now. But that idea that we can and ought to breed a better class of human beings, and the dross and the dregs will just have to take
Yeah.
what's coming to them as part of that great project. Is yeah, gosh, talk about ubiquitous. Um, is there kind of, from where you're at right now, especially working for the church, working for Archbishop Cordileone, what are some of the signs of hope that you see? What are some of the encouraging things? I say that in the context of not certainly not all Catholics I know, but there's a lot of Catholics I know who, I wouldn't say cynical,
Hmm.
but really troubled about the state of affairs in the culture, and really troubled by and large with state of affairs in the church. Uh, and it is, I'm sure you've had many, I'm sure you and Melissa have had many of these conversations too. Different people react to that kind of gloominess in different ways.
Hmm.
Some of them are, we gotta circle the wagons, hit the bunkers, hunker down, let the world go to hell in a handbasket, and we'll reemerge from the underground complex to put things back together in 100 years or so. Other people are, we got to get out there and inundate social media with Catholic content, and try to find all the little pagans online and bring them all back. And other people, I think, are just struggling even with a concept of how do I fend some of this stuff off at home. Uh, what in your view are just sort of some of the encouraging things you've seen, some of the signs of hope?
Well, first of all, you mentioned going into an underground bunker, and I just want to name and apologize for. I feel like if you haven't noticed, this is my half project here uh, of drywalling our garage, and I ran out of paint and primer right about here, and so you see the exposed drywall. Well, what's happening is the light from this door is coming in and illuminating the white behind me and making my face very dark, and become conscious of it as our conversation's gone on. So I'm not in like this is not a hostage video. I'm not in like an underground bunker, but I apologize for the lighting and the drywall. Anyway,
Ryan has been desperately dog whistling the entire
yeah,
time,
yeah,
hoping someone will pick up
giving
his coat and
signals
come
like
rescue
yeah.
him.
in terms of signs of hope for Catholic schools, I, as a result of everything we just mentioned, I think a lot of Catholic schools really are starting to recognize the need for those two things that I said really my job depends on. One is clarity about what we're actually doing here in Catholic education. We can't just rely on institutional fumes anymore, right? We have to be very clear about what we are, what we're doing, who we are, what makes us distinctive from other schools, other kinds of education. And then we need to be all in on that. We can't have it both ways. We can't serve God and mammon, right? We can't maintain our idols and still be distinctive Catholic schools. That's not to say we do away with all of our, the institutional structures, or do away with sports, or do away with AP. I'm not suggesting that, but we have to be more intentional, not less, about who we are, especially as we present who we are to the world. And that second thing, that requires courage. We have to have courage. You have to have people come in leadership roles who are willing to do it. And that means they themselves need to be well formed. They themselves need to be closely connected to Christ and to his church. You cannot have your own personal agenda about the social project or about education especially if you are a leader in Catholic schools. Mm-hmm. You have to be first and foremost a disciple and a lead disciple for the other people that you're inviting into the mission of Catholic schools. And I think we're realizing that there are a lot of programs that are, we can't just rely on secular institutions to form our teachers and our leaders anymore. And so there are Catholic institutions, Catholic universities that have really doubled down on how to form leaders and teachers as missionary disciples in Catholic schools. I won't name any specific because I don't want to leave anyone out and unfairly put people in boxes. But they exist. And, the other thing, and this might sound funny, I think a lot of Catholic institutions and dioceses are starting to question the notion of credentialing anyway. So a lot of dioceses and schools require their teachers to have, state teaching credentials. And I shouldn't let Melissa hear me say this too loudly because we get into this back and forth all the time. There's certainly value in that. Like it trains you in pedagogy, and some of it's good, some of it's not, but it's still a secular project. It has a secular project in mind. And so a lot of dioceses, and this is something we're doing in the Archdiocese of San Francisco, is to think about alternative credentialing for Catholic schools. What it means to be a credentialed teacher to the state of California and to the California Teachers Association Union is not the same as what it means to be a Catholic teacher for the Archbishop and even for the Catholic Church. So that's another sign of hope that you're seeing these things pop up, because they're a sign that people are taking seriously. They're really rethinking in a serious way what it means to run Catholic schools and to be Catholic schools in the world.
Yeah, that is encouraging. It's encouraging that the clarity and courage questions are being asked with some serious. I get the sense that's true. Yeah, gosh. Well, there's always a million other things we could talk about, Ryan. We'll have to tee up another one of these at some point. I'd love to just have a conversation about the whole bioethics thing, but looking specifically at some of the moving pieces with a little bit of depth. But we'll save that for next time. I think we've done good work for a first shot here, and now that we've got the wheels rolling, we can do it again. In the meantime, it gives you time to go and get primer and finish the drywall job behind you for the next.
I moved my camera so you don't have to look at that anymore. But yeah.
Well, the background is lovely regardless, but I do appreciate the fact that the reason you're sitting out in your garage at a ping pong table doing this is because you donated the office space to your wife today, and you've got a sick kid. So
Yeah.
Normally the background would be a little different. It's fun though. It's good. Gives it a nice level of gritty authenticity.
I do own books, by the way. They're just not behind me currently.
That's right. Yeah. You'll be moving those all to the garage for the next one.
Yeah. No, this is great. It's always great to talk to you, and anytime I'm happy to join. I love having these conversations, and hopefully you add chapters so people can skip just you and I reminiscing about seminary and life in Phoenix 20 years ago. So
That'll turn out to be the most replayed. We both know that already.
right, by our
Awesome.
wives.
Well, hey,
Yeah.
God bless, Ryan. Thanks so much for joining us here on Reasonably Rational. We'll look forward to catching up with you again down the road.
Thanks, Steve. See you later.